Why did medieval people drink so much booze? There was more to it than just having a good time. Because for them, alcohol wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity, shaping their daily lives in ways you wouldn't expect. And it all starts with something we take for granted today. Drinking water in medieval times was like rolling the dice with death. Wells, rivers, and ponds weren't just water sources. They were deadly cocktails of bacteria, human waste, and floating surprises no one wanted to identify. Medieval cities treated their waterways as all-in-one sewage systems, garbage disposals, and community bathtubs. The Thames in London became so foul by the 1300s that one chronicler described it as a concoction of all manner of filth. Medieval speak for don't drink this unless you want to meet your maker. Disease outbreaks were the predictable result. Dysentery, nicknamed the bloody flux for obvious reasons, was practically a medieval rite of passage. Cholera swept through towns with terrifying regularity. Intestinal parasites became unwelcome houseguests that never left. A single cup of contaminated water could leave you bedridden for weeks or send you to an early grave. Medieval doctors had a simple diagnostic method. If you drank from the town well yesterday and can't stop visiting the privy today, congratulations. You've joined the ranks of water drinkers who learned their lesson the hard way. Even nobles weren't safe from water's dangers. Castle designers brilliantly positioned wells downhill from latrines, giving royalty the privilege of drinking water naturally filtered through their own waste. Nothing says, "I'm important," like dysentery with a crown. These architectural failures meant that wealth provided no immunity from waterborne illness. Enter alcohol, medieval society's accidental health innovation. The brewing process killed bacteria through boiling and fermentation. People didn't understand the science, but they understood the results. Drink water, spend days on the privy, drink beer, stay alive. As one medieval saying put it, water makes you sick, but wine makes you well. This wasn't superstition. It was an accidental genius that saved countless lives. Boiling water would have worked too, but who had time for that? Gathering firewood just to make water safe would be like charging your phone with a hamster wheel. Technically possible, but wildly impractical. Beer was pre-sterilized and ready to drink. The alcohol content, even at just 1 to 3%, was enough to kill most harmful pathogens that would otherwise cause serious illness. In many towns, clean water actually cost more than weak beer. Water carriers would sell buckets from cleaner sources at premium prices, while small beer was affordable to almost everyone. A gallon of everyday ale cost about the same as a loaf of bread, around half a penny. For peasants earning 1 or 2 pennies daily, this was affordable medicine disguised as a daily beverage. Medieval drinking options were surprisingly diverse. Beer was the everyday drink, thick, cloudy, and nutritious. Think of it as liquid bread with benefits. Children drank weaker, small beer instead of juice boxes. Every village had its alewives, women who brewed at home and sold the excess, medieval history's first craft beer entrepreneurs. These women had the original work-from-home brewing operation, except instead of posting updates on social media, they'd hang an ale stake outside their door when a fresh batch was ready, the medieval equivalent of the open sign, but for alcohol. Wine dominated southern Europe, where grapes grew easily. In France, Italy, and Spain, even peasants drank local wine regularly. Northern Europeans considered it a luxury import. The poorest made do with piquette, watery grapeskin juice that was essentially medieval wine coolers minus the neon colors and regrettable decisions. Mead, a honey-based alcohol, remained popular especially in northern regions. It was usually stronger than beer, with an alcohol content closer to today's wines. One Anglo-Saxon poem claimed, "Mead warms the heart and loosens the tongue." And more importantly, it wouldn't give you deadly dysentery. For medieval people, drinking wasn't just about getting tipsy, it was about staying alive in a world where water could kill you. Medieval taverns didn't feature cocktail menus or imported beer taps, but they offered a surprising variety of alcoholic options. Their drink menu might have been limited by today's standards, but what it lacked in variety, it made up for in creative uses of whatever could possibly be fermented. Beer stood as the undisputed champion of medieval drinks. Unlike today's clear, fizzy beverages, medieval beer was thick, cloudy, and nutritionally dense. This mixture was then boiled with herbs for flavoring before fermentation. Early medieval beer lacked hops, the bittering agent we associate with modern beers. Instead, brewers used a mixture of herbs called gruit, which could include anything from heather and bog myrtle to yarrow and sweet gale. These herb mixtures varied by region and season, creating distinctive local flavors. By the 13th century, German brewers began using hops, which gradually spread throughout Europe. Hops not only added flavor, but also preserved the beer longer, allowing for larger production batches. Imagine a world where beer was actually healthier than water. The medieval dream that modern frat boys are still trying to convince their parents is true. The alcohol content in everyday beer remains surprisingly low, usually between 1 and 3%. This modest strength allowed people to drink throughout the day without becoming intoxicated. A medieval farmer might consume 2 to 3 quarts daily, yet still perform precision work with scythes and other dangerous tools. Records from medieval monasteries show that monks received a standard daily allowance of 1 gallon of beer, consumed throughout the day between prayers and labor. Monks weren't just praying to reach heaven, they were brewing their way there 1 gallon at a time. Ale, technically beer's close cousin, dominated much of northern Europe during the early medieval period. The difference between ale and beer comes down to one ingredient: hops. Ale was brewed without hops, using only the gruit herb mixture for flavoring. Without the preservative qualities of hops, ale spoiled quickly, usually within a few days. This necessitated constant local production, turning brewing into a common household activity. Medieval ale had the shelf life of unrefrigerated fish, which meant brewing wasn't just a hobby, it was a near-daily necessity. Women dominated early medieval brewing. These alewives brewed at home and sold their excess production, creating a crucial income stream for many households. Town records from 13th century England show that women made up over 75% of licensed brewers. When an alewife had beer to sell, she would place an ale stake outside her door, a pole with a bush tied to it, the medieval equivalent of a neon open sign. It was probably the world's first drive-through, except the horses weren't driving, and there was no window service, and you had to bring your own cup. So not really like a drive-through at all. By the 15th century, commercial brewing gradually shifted to male-dominated guilds as production scaled up, pushing women to the margins of what had traditionally been their industry. Men basically waited until brewing became profitable, then swooped in and took over, proving that the corporate glass ceiling was invented long before corporate glass windows. Wine flowed freely in southern Europe, where the climate favored grape cultivation. In regions like France, Italy, and Spain, even peasants drank local wine regularly as part of their daily diet. Archaeological evidence from rural French settlements shows that even modest households owned wine barrels and cups. Northern Europeans considered wine a luxury, with imported bottles costing up to 10 times more than local ale. Wine was the status symbol of its day. Medieval influencers weren't posting photos of their chalices on Instagram, but they were definitely making sure everyone at the feast noticed their imported Bordeaux. Wine quality varied dramatically based on price. The wealthy enjoyed aged wines from renowned regions, often spiced with expensive imports like cinnamon, ginger, and sugar. The poorest made do with piquette, made by soaking already pressed grape skins in water to extract any remaining flavor. Essentially medieval wine coolers without the marketing budget. Middle-class town dwellers typically consumed local wines within a year of production, as proper aging required specialized storage that few could afford. Medieval wine labels wouldn't have listed flavor notes of oak, cherry, or vanilla, more like probably won't kill you and doesn't taste like complete regret. Mead, the honey-based alcohol, held a special place in medieval drinking culture, especially in northern regions like Scandinavia and Britain. Made by fermenting honey with water, mead was usually stronger than beer, with an alcohol content closer to today's wines. Its production required significant honey reserves, making it more expensive than everyday beer. A gallon of mead might cost 4 to 10 pennies, compared to half a penny for basic ale. Bees were medieval brewers' little winged assistants, doing all the hard work of honey production just so humans could ferment it and act foolish in mead halls. The cultural significance of mead extended beyond mere refreshment. Nordic sagas frequently mention mead halls where warriors gathered to drink and boast of their exploits. Anglo-Saxon poetry described mead as a drink that warms the heart and loosens the tongue, useful for both romantic pursuits and political negotiations. In other words, mead was liquid courage for Vikings who needed no courage, the original hold my beer and watch this drink that preceded countless bad decisions across medieval Scandinavia. People attributed medicinal properties to mead, using it to treat everything from digestive issues to melancholy. One medical text from the 12th century recommended mead mixed with herbs as a treatment for winter sadness, perhaps the first documented seasonal affective disorder remedy. Medieval doctors might not have understood bacteria or viruses, but they knew that enough honey wine could make you temporarily forget your problems, which is basically the same as a cure, right? Cider and perry provided alternative options in regions with abundant orchards. Especially popular in Normandy and southwestern England, these fruit-based alcoholic drinks offered welcome variety to the medieval palate. Apple cider had an alcohol content similar to beer, while perry was often slightly stronger. As the Middle Ages progressed, distilled spirits entered the scene. Distillation technology, originally developed for perfumes and medicines, gradually adapted to alcohol production. By the 14th century, what we might recognize as whiskey appeared in Ireland and Scotland, while brandy production began in France. These early spirits weren't sipping drinks. They were fiery, rough beverages primarily used as medicines, applied both internally and externally for various ailments. Medieval whiskey made moonshine look refined. It wasn't aged in oak barrels so much as barely contained in whatever vessel wouldn't dissolve on contact. The medicinal use of aqua vitae spread throughout Europe. Monastery infirmaries stocked distilled spirits to treat everything from wounds to digestive problems. A 15th century medical manual recommended small amounts of distilled alcohol for clearing the vision, strengthening the memory, and dispelling melancholy. Medieval medicine had its priorities straight. If a treatment couldn't cure you, it should at least help you forget what ailed you in the first place. Price differences created clear drinking class distinctions. When a gallon of basic ale cost roughly the same as a loaf of bread, a gallon of imported wine might cost 10 pennies or more, almost a week's wages for a laborer. High-end wines, especially those spiced with expensive imports like cinnamon or sweetened with honey, were exclusively for the wealthy. These price points reveal why beer became a dietary staple. It was affordable enough for daily consumption across most social classes. The original champagne taste on a beer budget wasn't just an expression, it was a medieval economic reality. The diversity of medieval alcoholic beverages demonstrates a society that, despite its technological limitations, created remarkable variety within the constraints of available ingredients and preservation methods. For a society that couldn't figure out basic sanitation, they sure mastered the art of brewing because these drinks became so embedded in everyday life. Dawn broke over the medieval village, and the first order of business wasn't checking emails or scrolling through social media, it was reaching for a drink. Breakfast beer kicked off the day for most medieval folks. This morning brew wasn't the strong stuff we think of today, but rather low-alcohol, small beer containing just enough fermentation to kill bacteria while providing hydration for the workday ahead. Monks received a morning ration of 1 pint before prayers, proving that even the most devout started their day with liquid courage. These religious men weren't secret party animals. They simply needed safe hydration before a long day of manuscript copying and contemplation. Medieval breakfast drinking wasn't seen as problematic. It was as normal as our morning coffee, just with slightly more interesting side effects. Midday brought the main meal and, naturally, more alcohol. Field workers often consumed up to 2 quarts of ale with lunch. Harvest time reveals that manor lords were required to provide extra ale to laborers during the hottest months, not as a luxury, but as a necessity to prevent dehydration. The Lord of Essex complained about the excessive ale consumption of his harvest workers, who downed 8 quarts daily during peak summer work. That's 2 gallons per person, enough to put a modern drinker under the table, but because medieval ale was weaker and consumed throughout the day with food, workers remained surprisingly functional. Dinner, served in the late afternoon, featured the heaviest drinking. Household books from medieval estates show that evening ale was often stronger than daylight varieties, sometimes reaching alcohol content closer to modern beer. A French noble's expense records listed separate categories for day ale and evening ale, with the latter costing nearly twice as much per gallon. This evening indulgence made sense. The day's work was done, and people could relax without worrying about operating dangerous farm equipment afterward. Even children participated in this all-day drinking culture. Children's ale was significantly weaker, sometimes called three-penny ale, for its low strength, but still fermented enough to be safer than water. Medieval medical guides specifically recommended watered-down wine or weak ale for children over the age of 7, advice that would get Child Protective Services called on you faster than you could say medieval parenting today. Bedtime brought one final drink. The nightcap wasn't just a modern invention. Medieval people believed alcohol aided sleep and digestion. A popular medical text advised a small amount of wine before bed to settle the stomach and prevent harmful vapors from rising to the brain during sleep. The science was questionable, but the practice provided a fitting bookend to a day that began and ended with alcohol. From sunrise ale to bedtime wine, medieval drinking wasn't just about quenching thirst, it structured the entire day. But these drinking patterns were created more than just a schedule. Taverns, beer halls, and ale houses weren't just places to grab a drink. They were the community centers where medieval society functioned. In an era without coffee shops, public libraries, or community centers, these drinking establishments served as the primary spaces for social interaction, business dealings, and information exchange. Taverns in medieval towns operated as multi-purpose venues that modern businesses would envy. A typical day at the tavern might include morning business meetings, midday legal proceedings, afternoon craft guild gatherings, and evening entertainment. Town records from York show that in 1396, a single tavern called the White Hart hosted guild elections, 2 property transactions, a marriage negotiation, and a small claims court, all before dinner time. The alcohol served wasn't incidental to these activities, but central to them, creating an atmosphere where deals could be struck and conflicts resolved. The physical layout of medieval taverns reflected their social importance. Unlike modern bars designed primarily for drinking, medieval establishments featured large common tables, separate meeting rooms, and often an inner courtyard for larger gatherings. Archaeological excavations of a 14th century London tavern revealed distinct areas for different social classes, with benches near the door for casual drinkers and private booths at the back for merchants conducting business. The tavern wasn't just selling ale, it was selling social space, something in desperately short supply in crowded medieval towns. For rural communities, drinking gatherings called church ales served crucial social functions. These parish-sponsored events raised funds for church maintenance while providing rare opportunities for scattered farmsteads to come together. Quarterly, church ales generated between 70 and 90% of funds needed for church repairs, while simultaneously serving as the primary occasion for community-wide socialization. One 15th century church ale in Devon recorded attendance by 94% of parish adults, a participation rate that modern event planners would kill for. Medieval regulations acknowledged the social importance of drinking establishments through detailed laws governing their operation. Town ordinances typically required taverns to remain open during specified hours, maintain fair pricing, and provide basic hospitality to travelers. A 1355 London ordinance mandated that alehouses must serve any peaceful customer regardless of origin, perhaps the earliest right-to-service law in English history. The medieval legal system recognized that drinking establishments weren't luxury businesses but essential social infrastructure. The role of the brewster or tavern keeper extended far beyond serving drinks. These figures often functioned as informal bankers, news sources, matchmakers, and conflict mediators. Tavern keepers testifying about business deals struck under their roofs or resolving disputes between patrons before they escalated to legal proceedings. In smaller communities, the person who controlled the alcohol supply wielded significant social influence. Female brewers held particularly important social positions in early medieval communities. Before commercial brewing took hold, alewives produced most local alcohol and often maintained the only public spaces in small villages. Manor court records show that charges against alewives for watering down their product or using false measures were taken extremely seriously, not just as economic crimes, but as offenses against community welfare. When an alewife in 13th century Norfolk was fined the equivalent of 2 months' wages for serving weak ale. The severe penalty reflected her breach of social trust rather than mere consumer fraud. Religious institutions participated actively in drinking culture rather than opposing it. Monasteries operated some of the largest breweries in medieval Europe, producing both for internal consumption and commercial sale. The Benedictine Abbey at Burton-on-Trent brewed over 1 million gallons of ale annually by the 15th century, making it the largest beer producer in England. When monasteries brewed for commercial purposes, they weren't just generating income. They were participating in and shaping local social structures through control of alcohol production. Even religious pilgrimages incorporated drinking as a central social component. The route to the shrine of Thomas Becket at Canterbury became famous for its tavern stops, where pilgrims from different backgrounds mingled and shared stories. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales wasn't just literary invention, it accurately depicted how alcohol facilitated social interaction between people who would otherwise remain separated by class and profession. Pilgrim badges from Canterbury often featured drinking vessels alongside religious symbols, acknowledging the dual nature of the journey as both spiritual quest and social excursion. Urban drinking establishments served as information exchanges in an era without mass media. News, rumors, job opportunities, and political developments spread from tavern to tavern faster than through any other network. During periods of political unrest, authorities often targeted taverns first, not because they opposed drinking, but because they feared the rapid information sharing these establishments facilitated. When peasant revolts erupted in 1381, royal officials specifically ordered taverns closed, recognizing that revolutionary ideas spread fastest where people gathered to drink. Craft guilds formalized the connection between alcohol and social organization through elaborate drinking rituals. Guild feast days featured strictly choreographed toasting sequences that reinforced the social hierarchy while simultaneously creating bonds between members. An apprentice admitted to the London Goldsmiths Guild in 1424 documented the experience in his journal, noting that learning the complex drinking customs proved more challenging than mastering metalworking techniques. These ritualized drinking practices weren't mere entertainment. They encoded social relationships and obligations in memorable sensory experiences. Foreign visitors often remarked on the central role of drinking establishments in English social life. In 1496, a Venetian ambassador observed with surprise that the English conducted serious business in taverns rather than homes or official buildings. He noted that the alehouse is to the English what the piazza is to Italians, where all matters public and private are decided. This reflected a broader reality. In medieval England, drinking culture wasn't separate from important affairs, but deeply intertwined with them. As towns grew larger and social structures more complex, drinking establishments evolved to serve different niches. By the late 15th century, larger cities featured specialized establishments, taverns for merchants and professionals, alehouses for laborers, wine shops for the wealthy, and beer halls for craft workers. This diversification reflected not a diminishing social role, but an expansion of it as drinking culture adapted to increasingly complex urban environments. The social bonds forged through shared drinking helped create the foundation for other institutions that would later emerge. From guild support networks to early insurance schemes, many innovations in social organization first developed informally among regular drinking companions before becoming formalized. Medieval drinking culture wasn't just about recreation. It created the social connections that made medieval society function. Beyond these everyday social settings, medieval society developed elaborate drinking traditions. Regular drinking kept medieval society functioning, but celebratory drinking transformed ordinary life into something memorable. No matter how grim daily existence might be, special occasions created opportunities for communal joy and extraordinary amounts of alcohol. Weddings ranked among the most alcohol-soaked events in medieval life. Unlike modern one-day celebrations, medieval weddings often lasted 3 days or more, with drinking beginning before the ceremony and continuing long after the couple departed.